Welcome to Mind and Heart. I'm Sister John Dominic, a foundress of the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist. It has been my joy to have been involved in Catholic education for over 30 years. One of my privileges for the community has been to create Lumen Ecclesiae Press, a publishing organization that develops educational resources used now by over 500 schools around the United States and the world. Lumen Ecclesiae is our call to magnanimity, our call to be large-souled, to do something greater for the Church. So today, I invite anyone interested in becoming a saint to join with us as we unpack the deep beauty, mystery, and certainties of our faith to transform our lives so that we can know, love, and serve God with our mind and heart. Welcome to episode 4 of Mind and Heart, a podcast of the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist. And I'm really excited in this episode to really begin our discussion of echoing the mystery. I mentioned this in the opening episode where I was given an overview of all the publications that we've been able to produce so far in Lumen Ecclesiae Press. And echoing the mystery is a little bit different than how we started out with Disciple of Christ, Education and Virtue. But in here, actually, I would say that this book started even before all of that started. Maybe this is really what got things going, because it's probably been 12 years ago now, when Barbara Morgan, when I was studying at Franciscan University and finishing up my master's degree, she was called by Father Scanlon to come and to teach at Franciscan, but also, most importantly, to begin a catechetical program. And the very first class that she taught there was called Scripture, the Heart of Catechesis. And I remember in being in that class, just really being touched by her approach, her humility, and her deep love of the faith. And I think one thing that Barbara really showed me is really what a catechist is really a witness. You know, that you're looking to really look for conversion in the people that you teach as you begin to hand things on. And she was really kind of unpacking, techniques and the ways in which this is done. And she would talk about this approach that she developed to analyzing doctrine, to understanding it, because during all the years in which she was a catechist, there was times before the Catechism of the Catholic Church was done. People were looking for direction. There was a little bit of people being allergic to doctrines, because it may have been a little too formal, or we have to believe these things. And I think that she really fell in love. I mean, she had fallen in love with the faith when she was really 14, when she started being a catechist and trying to find ways to hand that on, So really hearing her, teaching, and then she soon, for a period of years after that time, when she retired, she moved back to Ann Arbor. And I thought, wow, she's right here in our neighborhood. And actually her grandchildren were were in our schools, and we just kind of were bumping into her. So I asked her, if she'd be willing to come and to teach the sisters catechesis, and were you in any of those classes?
I was in her last group.
Her last group, okay,
yeah,
okay.
I was a postulant.
So she would come over very faithfully, and she actually carved out a time where she would come and make that holy hour in our chapel, to really just spend that time in prayer, so she'd have that time of silence. So when I can still remember in our chapel where I was standing thinking, hearing of what she had done, hearing the impact of her approach was having on the lives of catechists, and thinking, and hearing the sisters talking about the enthusiasm of what they were experiencing in her class, thinking, there's got to be a way that we could, get that so that it can be used, that we can hold on to it, And so, and at the same time, I was a principal of the school, and I was trying to run the school, train catechists, realizing how important it was to hand on the faith, and why I wanted to be able to kind of capture what her approach is so that I could use that for the own teachers, So just a little bit more background on this. So we tried to do it. Jen Tom was very helpful. We looked, they were also, I think the people at Franciscan, even at that time with Bron Bolster, and really they tried to make the effort. And as many times as we would start, there'd be something that would stop it, either human resources or she herself would get sick, she'd become very ill. And a couple times one time she was so near death that she had gone, this is probably her practical side of her, where she planned her funeral.
It's happened actually 3 times.
I know,
the last one happened while we were working on
and
this.
I can remember when she kind of resurfaced, one time she came to me and she said, "I really feel like I need to finish this. I think we need to really finish what we're done." And I was like, okay, because I was like, okay, Barbara, we'll finish it. We'll figure out how we can get this done. And I was thinking, again, how can I do this to get people together? And totally in God's providence, you were teaching, and you needed to come back to the mother house, and I was out talking to Mother Sumpta, and she's like, Sister Athanasius is coming back, and I knew, I think she had mentioned maybe you had some experience in catechesis or whatever, and she's available, and I didn't at that moment, I didn't know, and we were there, but then as I began to see really your wonderful gifts and talents that you have and your understanding of it, I thought, well, maybe we can finish this. I don't know what your first memory of it is, but you may have thought I was crazy.
It was you walking to the table, handing me this thing of outlines and saying, "Don't change anything.
Yeah.
Just get it in a form that people can access it." So, and it's true, Barbara's got such a gift for that.
Yeah. So I think that was really the thing, is that, and I do think it is important, the keys. We have the 7 keys, and the format and the template was really important, because I think the reason why I was so insistent upon that was because there had been so much thought, and and Barbara was very precise about, this is what needs to happen, this is what needs to flow, so, but really, Sister, why I'm really happy to have you on this podcast as we begin understanding Echoing the Mystery, and really kind of help people unpack it, because they see it maybe a little bit of a daunting book. It's really just to express gratitude, really, for your willingness. I mean, sometimes obedience has something to do with it. It's part of what you're doing, but God works through that, and He works through our gifts of nature, and grace. So the grace is the obedience, the nature is your natural gifts. To really to the hours upon hours that you've spent yourself, working on this, the hours that you spent with Barbara, listening and talking through this, and to really bring order to this. I just really wanted to, before I have you say something, just really thank you for that. I mean, what you've done. I know she's profoundly grateful. The community is grateful. That we're able to kind of bring it together in something that we can offer to other catechists, other teachers, other people in the church, that can really provide a roadmap on how to bring together the Catechism of the Catholic Church with Scripture, because we know that Scripture drives doctrine, Scripture drives the mysteries. Scripture is the place where God's divine revelation is contained. So. I really just would love to hear about, your personal experiences. Maybe we could start there, just what it was like, to work with Barbara, what it was like to understand how to, unpack this.
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible opportunity. I'm so grateful to Mother and you and the community for picking me out for that. It has been such a gift to sit down routinely with Barbara. So it all started with that process of like going through what she had already produced and trying to organize it in a way that was accessible. But then I finally caught up to her and had to start drafting for her because she had been so ill. So getting into her mind and figuring out how to do all of this was such good training, then be able to sit down with her and talk about all of it, to really just go deeper in how to understand the deposit of faith, how to treasure those mysteries and express the treasure. But then also, of course, we always would get into, well, how does this actually apply to the students that I have right now?
The practical application.
The practical application, looking back and forth.
Yeah,
it was such a gift.
Right. I can imagine. So before we talk about that part of it, one thing you just touched upon, which I think is really, really important to understand, because when we talk about catechesis, it's different than, it takes place, if you talk about a school setting, it takes place in a school setting, but it's different than science, it's different than math, it's different than other, it's intellectual, it's intellectual that, we talk about, we know, because you have to know something before you can love something. So it is intellectual, but at the same time, it's not how you would prepare another lesson or something. And what you referred to is that what she was teaching you as you were beginning to do it is where there really is a craft. There's a craft to how it's put together. There's a craft on how you teach it, how you present it. And maybe you could just say a little bit about what you learned in that process. Yeah,
it's probably the most important thing I learned. And I think till my dying day, because she said it so many times, I will always hear in my head and Barbara's voice, the essentials are what you have to give them, because they will not get them if they are not given to them by their catechist. Because the faith, as it says in Scripture, comes through hearing. It's not through reading a book. They can't pick up a book and read it. They need somebody to show them in their own treasuring how to treasure it.
Right.
And as John Paul II says, catechesis, the whole goal is to put them in touch and communion with the person of Jesus Christ. So all of those pieces that you're handing on, it's not about so much getting into the head, it's also about getting into the heart so that there's a response of love. So as Barbara and I were talking about that continually, just kept saying that the essentials are what they will not get. What won't they get? Not everything. That's why echoing the mystery doesn't look like another dogmatic outline like you would normally have, okay, yes, you teach these parts and the marks of the church. You have to expand this part of the sacramental theology in order to communicate it all. It's those are all in there, but they're not as emphasized. And it's a little different because you're looking at that goal of communion with Christ through, especially the theological virtues. That was another huge, bringing those two together, the essentials and then the theological virtues, and looking at the theological virtues as the means by which the children relate, or the adults, or whomever you're teaching.
And those are what's infused in us in our baptism. So you're really kind of in a certain sense, kind of bringing those alive and training them, how to see this, the doctrine or the mystery in a certain sense, and that way. So keep going, yes.
So basically every catechesis now that I approached, before it was okay, I have to get all these little pieces in, this doctrine and this fact, and they need to know that term and this term. It's okay, they're going to know all of that by the time I'm done, mostly. There might be a couple of things that get less emphasis, but the thing that's really going to drive the catechesis is the question of how can I invite them to greater faith? How can I invite them to greater hope and inspire them to it? How can I show them how to love Christ more deeply? And then everything else comes into place, because then once you know that those are the important things, you know exactly how much you have time for in the time that's set aside for catechesis. It's all organized and it's all purposeful, and the students love it so much. I saw that, the change in how my students received my catechesis as I went through that first, I was working with Barbara actually the first 2 months that I was teaching again, and it was incredible, just the transformation it had in their lives and how much they love receiving those lessons now. They don't think it's class.
So
even though I test them.
Right. So, but it is a little bit different. I mean, you talk about this too when you do some catechetical training. You want to show them, the importance of the sacred space. That that the environment or the atmosphere that you set is going to be something that's a little bit different,
Yes.
And I think what you've done, working with her on this so beautifully is that bringing together, like you mentioned, the essentials, and then what's one of the things we'll be working on, and we'll probably talk about this on other podcasts down the road a little bit as we have it developed a little bit more. But trying to align these things to different standards, or to because we do need it does need to be measured. We need to be able to do it, but how we'll continue to help people use this book and use it to its fullest potential. To see it, but I think when the essentials. How there's the organic unity of everything, but just the art and the music. I mean, what was kind of in Barbara's mind? She talked about the essentials being important, but bringing in the music and the art and the liturgy. How does that round it out?
Putting flesh on all of that. Basically, it's the incarnational thing. It was really funny. I had a student in my office 2 days ago, and I called up a picture of something, a church, and he actually recognized another church that flashed through and went, hey, that's the church it's the really, really old one, the oldest one in the world. And he knew all of this from actually looking at a picture that was in the Doctrine Project. He could remember everything his teacher said about that. About it was that picture of Christ that was famous, the Pantocrator, that it was covered up by the Muslims during like the 15th century because of the iconoclasm there. And that they didn't also believe in the incarnation and how important that was. So, and this is a really average kid.
Right.
It's nothing extraordinary.
Right,
so I was blown away.
But again, I think the beautiful about that is he's probably a visual learner.
Yes.
So what you're doing in this is you're, there may be some where they may hear the hymn that's related to this particular doctrine, and that's someone who's more musical. It may be able to see this, and it brings it together.
Yes.
And you have the artwork, where it's going to be for those that are visual. And it comes to life for them. Or if it's in the liturgy or praying, that's. They begin to kind of have ears that do hear,
They come to me, my students, all the time. Sister, our memory verse we said it as the psalm this week. I'm like, yes, you did. That's why we do that. It's because that's inviting you into that response. Didn't you pay so much more attention when that psalm was prayed? Right. Liturgy too. We just use the rites for writing thank yous to Father for the gift of his priesthood to us. They learn from all of that, and then they learn to treasure it and to truly enter into the liturgy, which is where that connection with Christ happens in its most glorified form here on earth.
Yeah, right. So what you've, really, sister, I mean, again, I just really want to thank you. And I mean, this isn't going to be our only conversation, I think, because if there's anyone that's, as close to this, you have been, because I mean, you really just worked very closely with Barbara, and she's not really able to really participate in something like this or have the conversation. So we're going to need to be able to, we want to continue it, and then, have bring people in that we know that. First one I'm going to be talking to is Sister Louise Murray. She's been teaching our sisters about it, so that we can kind of hear firsthand what her experience has been teaching it, and then other people that have come in contact with it. So that it can be accessible. I mean, I when you sit back and everyone has a certain gift that we can bring to it, and you really just your depth of understanding, just to be able to sit there with Barbara, to understand it, to write it, to pull it together. I kind of bring a practical mind where it's like, if we're going to look at the keys, let's get the keys and let's make sure it's the same thing, that's there. That may be about my only stamp on that, but and then also being stubborn.
You said it was going forward.
Yeah, being stubborn enough that we're never going to give this project up. We're gonna get this done. So we did get it done. So, but
it's beautiful, sister, and that's testimony to your other mark has been like just the beauty of the layout and the fact that that's important, that things that are
Oh yeah,
Our
because
faiths are
when you
beautiful.
see something now, it also is a little fitness book because it's a little heavy. But
Yes, there you go. So hopefully
Yeah.
someday we'll get like the Kindle version for other people.
Exactly. So really, thank you, and those of you who are listening to us, and really as we began with Lumen Ecclesiae Press, as this book was put out, and now as we begin to have conversations about this with Lumen Ecclesiae Digital or the podcast, or you can find these things on YouTube and follow us, the Dominican Sisters of Mary, and those people that work and collaborate with us as we strive to really fully live the charism of St. Dominic.
Can I mention just one thing? Because you mentioned gifts.
Yeah.
And this had been occurring to me a lot as I was preparing for talking with you today. But it's really interesting, the gift that Barbara has been and is to catechesis. She was the department head at Franciscan. Father Mike Scanlon saw her and tapped her for those gifts. But I've been amazed, but as I talk with her, like her understanding of the importance of the liturgy, of her development of these keys, which is going to be her major lasting contribution to catechesis, but her understanding of curriculum and how to do RCIA. She had this incredible understanding of all of it that's almost been like refracted, almost like the colors of the rainbow in her various students. So you've got James Pauly and his understanding of liturgy. Ron Bolster's got the curriculum. You've got this virtue thing that I think, and especially your Life of Christ understanding with Scripture has been flowing from that. It's been incredible to see that how God gave her the gifts she needed at that time, but then they've been enhanced in her going out to her students. It's just been really
as it's
beautiful.
spread out, you talk about Chris Stefanik or Dr. Edward Sri, there's people that
they're all doing great work, and it's all different.
Well, and actually in the first class that Barbara taught, Scripture, Heart of Catechesis, Jeff Cavins was in there, and he was talking, beginning with the Bible timeline or whatever. So Sister Athanasius, thanks you again for stopping by. This is not going to be the only time, because we'll continue to unpack the beautiful richness of this resource of Echoing the Mystery, unlocking the deposit of faith in catechesis, and thank you for that and all that you've done. So we'll continue this conversation on our podcast, Mind and Heart.
Catechists, catechism. The word catechesis derives from the Greek, which means to echo down. What the catechist is echoing down is what God has revealed to the world that needs to be taught, that needs to be passed down.
Very blessed, and I'd say it's a privilege for the Dominican Sisters to be a part of bringing her life's work to fruition. When she retired after her time at Franciscan University, she came back to Ann Arbor, which is her roots, because I had her at class, her very first class that she taught at Franciscan University.
I thought you might be interested to know some of the students that God sent to Franciscan University to study with me, and that I had the great pleasure of teaching. Chris Stefanik, Edward Sri, Jeff Cavins, Bill Kymick, Ron Bolster, Eric Westby, Bob Rice, James Pauly, Scott Solem, Amy Roberts, Sister John Dominic, Sister Elizabeth Ann, Sean Dalton, Jim Beckman, Carol Brown, Tim Carpenter, William O'Leary, Carson Weber.
I asked her if she'd be willing to come over and give our sisters some instruction on catechesis. The sisters were just enthralled by the way in which she was presenting a certain way on how to hand on the faith that I thought, we've got to get this knowledge. This institutional knowledge that she's had for her entire life needs to be preserved. So I asked Barbara, and she kind of looked at me, and she was like, yes. But in God's providence, at a certain period of time, we had reached a point where we really needed someone to be able to sit down with her because she could no longer write. And at that time, Sister Athanasius was available.
Barbara Morgan is a legend in catechesis, and she's given so much to the church that's so important. It was really a dream come true to be able to work with her on this and to help make this accessible to catechists. This has been a project that's been in the work for, 20 years, 10 years with our community. So I would come to her home and sit with her for a few hours each week as we went through the doctrines to make everything just mesh together and make sure the whole faith was represented.
We have generations of young people that don't know the faith, that hasn't been handed on. Young people that really have to be evangelized, and then you have to be evangelized before you can be catechized. In this resource, we've taken 62 doctrines, and all the information that you need to know about that particular doctrine is in one place. That's what I think is beautiful about it. In the introduction to the book, there's a great little roadmap, all right, that helps guide you through how to unpack each of the doctrines. So in the roadmap, there's 7 keys to each doctrine. The first key is the divine perspective. The second key is the theological virtues. The third part is scripture and essentials. The fourth key, related doctrines. Then we have common errors. And then we move to beauty and the liturgical resources. I would say that this is for anyone that has the awesome responsibility of teaching the faith. If you're a parent, if you're homeschooling, if you're a priest and you want to enrich your homilies, if you're involved with youth ministry, if you are RCIA. So I encourage you to really just to get it, to meditate on it, to contemplate it, to marinate in it, just become saturated, and you have everything together right there at your fingertips. You'll become an awesome catechist to lead many souls to come to know Jesus Christ. If you like this episode of the Mind and Heart podcast, I invite you to click on the next available podcast and continue to enrich your mind, heart, and soul.